Alright, let's go on to 5 more relatively new releases, and this time I wanted to kind of stick in the horror direction, especially since one of these I felt really sort of passionate about, sort of unexpectedly. But let's start with that one, which is Final Destination Bloodlines, which is the 6th movie. And I did do like a whole video a few years back of 1 through 5 together, and I've always been one of those people where for me it was always 1 and 3 were the ones I consider the best ones and like the peak of the franchise, with 5 being really good also. I know a lot of people freak out over 2. I always thought that was mainly due to like how memorable the kills were in 2, which is very much true. I remember it being like, it was practically like an event when the 2nd movie came out. I remember it so vividly. But, and I felt like there was something story-wise much more convoluted to 2. Whereas, like, 1 and 3 and the way they sort of delved more into the concept and kind of did more with that creatively, and not just focusing on the kills, I thought kind of elevated them a little more. And this one is just kind of all of the above. It does something really interesting story-wise, and it really ups the kill factor. And I think the thing that helps also is that this is a movie that's like super, super gruesome and disgusting, but it's not like constant. So it does feel like when they get to the actual gory moments, there's more of a freedom to go as crazy as possible, to where it doesn't feel like it's just for the sake of it. Like, it's kind of been built up to enough, and you have enough of a connection to the characters themselves that everything hits in sort of a bigger way. Like I said, not even just the gore factor, but just the story in general. When you think about the fact of the concept, because first of all, what's really great about the concept also is that it just makes so much sense that it's actually sort of surprising that it took them till the 6th movie to use this as a concept in the direction that they go. But there's also that idea of, in the rest of the movies, there's that sort of friend, sort of classmate relation to the characters and how they come together. And so there is, and oftentimes there'll be also like maybe just acquaintances in passing or something. With this one, with like all of the major characters essentially being one family, adds this sort of emotional element and this closeness that wasn't there before. Like, it's stronger than it's ever been. Because one thing I did point out about the previous movies in this franchise is that they have something occasionally, but it is there, that a lot of horror movies kind of gloss over, which is, there's a surprising amount of funerals in these movies, and it's like with all the horror movies you see and all the death that happens in them, and the way you would expect characters to react to those, there's never really much grieving room in horror movies typically, which is something we don't really, pay attention to too much if we're... Because if you're just into horror in general, and it's like, oh, we're here for the kills, and we're here for the scary element, and that's pretty much it, that's fine for those movies, but when you choose to put in this sort of emotional foundation and have characters actually react and grieve to what's going on, there is another sort of layer here that makes it more effective when everything else happens. So like I said, the fact that the concept now sets it up to where all the characters have a familial bond makes everything much closer, and feel like the stakes are kind of a bit higher than they've been. And all of that is to not even mention that we have a nearly 20-minute opening sequence, because it's always, with these movies also, they've set themselves up to where it's like, everybody asks what's going to be the opening disaster that causes all the mass death and is essentially the premonition. And yeah, for this one to really go all in on that in this really big way, because this is something that I remember back in the day hearing a lot of people give like possible concepts and possibilities for what other disasters you could use. This is one that I don't think ever occurred to people, but it feels like it perfectly sets it up, especially when you have these moments when we've obviously reached a point. It's kind of always been this way, but we've really reached a point to where the franchise is known enough now that there's this, like, self-awareness and playfulness as it leads into each big moment. How it knows that the audience doesn't really know for sure what's going to happen, so they set up all these different possibilities of how people could possibly go. And the idea that we don't really know what's misdirection and what isn't. Because there could be something that seems way too obvious, and then that ends up being the thing after we've gone through a whole other process of other things that didn't end up killing the person. But it's... so they play a lot with that, and like there's an elevator in this opening scene, and where it's one of those things where, like, every sound is amplified as the fear grows, and when you can just sense that it's having so much fun with itself, that really does open up the audience to do the same. And this franchise has basically mastered that at this point, so that's really fun. And nice, and the fact that when we've talked before about, we kind of had this conversation with, like, when we talked about Terrifier and Hatchet and stuff like that, the idea that gore can be fun might sound like this weird thing to somebody sort of outside of horror that doesn't really see horror in the way that a fan would. In the way that there are times where, you know, gore can be genuinely scary, and then there's times where it could just be, you know, overkill because, you know, the filmmakers had nothing else but that to work on, and those tend to be lesser movies. And then you have the movies like this, where it's like, not only is it what you come here for, and you do have that factor of it being, because especially in this one, with how gruesome this one is, there are moments that are genuinely, like, horrifyingly disgusting, and you, one of those I can't turn away, but also I desperately want to turn away sort of things. And there's just something in the way it sets up with those fun angles of not knowing where it's going to come from. There's just something so entertaining about it. Like, it shows you, like, this is like the peak form of how entertaining horror can be, in this example of how there's so many horror fans and how enthusiastic they are. This is just such a great example of that, I think, of how to demonstrate that. I mean, like I said, if you're not, like, you know, a horror fan to begin with, it's going to be hard to convince you that this kind of thing can be entertaining and fun, but if you're there, then you're there. So, another thing is, I was talking about the emotional factor going into this, and the family element of it. There was a particular turning point in this. Like, I was having fun with it, and was really pleased with how it was turning out. And at some point, there's this turning point to where it reaches that moment of, okay, this is getting really good at this point. Because usually there's, like, that halfway mark where it tends to go one way or the other. Either it's like, yes, this movie definitely has me, or, oh, I really love the direction this is going. Or what tends to be the more common case, which is, this would be about the time that it shits the bed, and and it kind of starts to fall apart, and you realize that the concept and the ideas couldn't really sustain themselves the whole way. But luckily, this is one of those movies where when it kind of reached that particular point, it was the tattoo parlor scene is when it really happened, where I was like, okay, I'm in with this movie till the end at this point. Like, it's really got me at this point. And that remained that way for the rest of the movie. And the way that it starts off, because it's like this really actually sad and poignant moment with this cousin character. Richard Harmon is the actor. Richard Harmon is, like, so good in this. I was genuinely thrown off by how, because the character set up is just like this annoying sort of side character, and it's like, oh, that guy's definitely gonna die at some point, and probably really bad too. But then there's this turning point with his character where he has this really sad and poignant moment, and everything turns, the character turns, and, like, it feels like the whole vibe of the movie sort of turns in this moment, and goes in this interesting direction. And the way this scene plays out is, and the way they are able to have their cake and eat it too, is because it is this genuine character moment, and you really feel for the character, and it's this actual feeling. But while this is happening, the domino effect that we know to anticipate in this movie, where something horrific is probably about to happen, is still happening in this moment while we're feeling with this character, and sort of being able to combine those elements into one scene, and on top of just like how the scene plays out and the music choice and all that, it just really crescendoed into this perfect scene that was like, like I said, it just really felt like a turning point for the movie of, okay, there's actual greatness in this movie, which is this really satisfying feeling, especially when you've had that feeling so many times, and like then the movies sort of turn on themselves, or they just kind of, they drop the ball essentially. But this one doesn't do that. So I was just really, especially from that moment on, I was just really, really on board with this movie. And it's like, it's in between the kills or moments like that or whatever, it just, like, it's like great moment after great moment after great moment until it gets to the end. Of course, obviously, one of those great moments that we were all anticipating was this last final scene with Tony Todd. And the way they were able to utilize this character one more time, and the way he was set up in the other movies to make us feel a certain way, and then when he comes back here, he's clearly still the same character, but now there's like a totally different vibe, and there's sort of a reveal of sorts, or a sort of non-reveal, depending on what you were expecting from this character, which is really great. And it's just genuinely, like, as a horror fan especially, and as somebody that literally calls the original Candyman like a comfort movie, weirdly enough, Tony Todd was one of those deaths that was like really, really big. Like, you hear, about, actors that you really liked in a lot of stuff, and then you hear about their deaths, and it's like, oh, that really sucks. And it's like, oh, those movies will have a little bit of sadness in them, but they'll get to live on through those movies, and it'll be great. But Tony Todd felt like a really, really big one. I don't know that I was aware that he was sick, despite how physically obvious it is, now that we've seen. But I feel like I didn't hear anything about that, and his death was really abrupt to me. But to realize where he was now, and the fact that they had been they were clearly planning this send-off given his dialogue, it's just this really beautiful scene that really caps off his career in a way that he's able to end it in horror, but I love the poignancy of it, and the way they went in this very sort of serious direction with it. And it doesn't take the movie off course, which is really good, because it would seem like one of those moments that could be just like, oh, this is clearly, obviously, this thing. It almost feels like it doesn't belong in the movie, and then it's this whole thing. But, like I said, when they set up those moments earlier, and especially having, like, more emotional stakes, and having those moments that are here without being out of place, this scene just fell perfectly into place. And was such a great, sad send-off, and, yeah, so I just really, really appreciate how that turned out. And then the movie just continues on into its climax, and is everything you want out of a Final Destination movie. So I knew when this came out, the reviews were surprisingly good, and they were saying like it was the best of the franchise. And it's like sometimes in that instance, the bar can be in different places. Like, sometimes it'll be like you hear that and it's like, oh wow, it actually is that good. And other times it'll be like, oh, they must have kind of set the bar a little low or something. So I was prepared for this to be good, but I'm not usually one of those people that immediately jumps to, oh, this is the best one of the franchise, especially a franchise that's been going for as long as it has, like 25 years almost. No, 25 years exactly, actually, I think. But yeah, it was, as much as I love the first one and the third one, this immediately had vibes of, I think they've reached a height they have not reached yet. Whether it be in concept, or the kills, or the emotional payoffs, or whatever it may be, the characters themselves, whatever it is, but just everything here is working. And I think it's an especially nice surprise, because even though the title makes sense given the concept, that is such a straight-to-DVD title. I was a little concerned when I first heard that. But holy shit, did they really nail what they were going for with this one. So, as a Final Destination fan, I couldn't be more happy with this, and it sounds like a lot of people were on the same page with that. So, yes, that really exceeded expectations in a way I'm really satisfied with. So, let's go the opposite direction now and talk about a piece of shit. We've got a new Fear Street movie on Netflix, Prom Queen. And here's the thing, is they did the Fear Street trilogy a few years back or so, and everybody went crazy for that. And I did do a video of it on here, and I was holding back in that video, I think, because I didn't really care for that trilogy. Like, none of those three did I care for. But I was actually... people were so fanatic about it, I think I was afraid to say at the time that I didn't. And that's not even something that happens often. Like, I'll typically tell you how I feel about something for real. But people were going so crazy for this thing, I was, like, genuinely afraid to say, I don't like any of them. And the problem with that is that, obviously, if you're familiar with this channel, horror is my favorite thing to talk about. It's like the whole... I've been watching 80s horror practically non-stop for, like, the past several months. And it's like this comfort place, like I was just talking about before. And so, you would think this is totally my shit. And the fact that, I grew up on R.L. Stine's stuff, particularly the Goosebumps books, and then the... Fear Street I wasn't really that familiar with. I did know that it was like a more sort of... It was darker, and more mature in a sense, in regards to, like, it's what you graduated to after Goosebumps when you got older, like, in your, like, teen years. And I didn't really read any of those until relatively recently. I found, like, several at, like a thrift shop or something. They were, like, 50 cents each. This one wasn't in there, but it was enough to give me a vibe of what these sort of, darker stories were. The stories that have, like, genuine death in them and stuff like that. Which is surprising when you are a Stine fan starting at, like, Goosebumps or something. So, take all that into account, how much I'm really on the R.L. Stine train, and how much, you know, horror is a part of my being. And, yeah, this should all line up. But this whole Netflix Fear Street thing is clearly not my thing. But the thing is I could see, you know, things in that trilogy that I could see why it worked for a lot of people, and the way they went into it with, like, the timelines and the connecting stories and all that stuff. Like, there's something in there, and the way they did the different eras. Like, there is something to that. This, I can't find a redeemable quality in. Netflix is still stuck in their fucking 80s nostalgia thing. They're still stuck in their Stranger Things phase. Like season 1 of Stranger Things phase. Where we've got them talking about the Lost Boys, which is something that was just addressed in Freaky Tales. Like, Freaky Tales is set at, like, the same time, and also immediately jumps to the Lost Boys. It's its first reference for some reason. But there's, like all the music choices, they really go all in on, oh, if we're going to do a prom setting, that means we can have a constant soundtrack. So let's just do the 80s soundtrack thing. That'll hide any flaws we have in our otherwise setup, and it's like, oh, here, this makes you feel 80s, doesn't it? The easiest shit you can possibly do. They go see Phantasm 2. There's, like, basically most of, like, the first half hour or so before they're actually at the prom is just, hey guys, it's the 80s. Or specifically 87, I guess. And that there's one kill to start off with, and it was one of those cases where a lot of this might just be me being some, you know, bitter old man of sorts. Like, there's, especially watching, like, you know, current Netflix stuff or something like that, where they're just trying as hard as they can to cater to this particular new generation. I just feel so removed and so fucking old, and maybe you can say out of touch, whatever you want to call it. but it was like the first kill that happens is the only character I recognize, is the only actor I recognized in this movie that wasn't an adult, or playing an adult. So I had to think, like, is this an unknown cast? Usually it's not the case. Usually it's like, oh no, they're in this popular thing I've never fucking heard of, or whatever. Or this other Netflix property that took off, but if you don't pay attention to Netflix constantly, you'll never know that thing existed. So I didn't know if they were doing, like, a Drew Barrymore thing here, or a Janet Leigh thing here, where the first kill is the only younger actress that I recognized. So, if that's the case, that is an interesting choice. But if it is, like, oh no, it's a whole cast of recognizable people, if you pay attention to certain shit. So, maybe that was something they were going for, but I don't know. So, another thing is, once we do get to prom, it basically becomes, prom night, essentially. It's the gruesome kills, and it's dancing, and that's pretty much it. There's almost this Carrie vibe going on, where it's like the whole voting for the prom queen thing, and it's like, maybe I've just seen Carrie too many times, and my first thought was like, wait, are they doing, like, the rigged voting thing? Is this leading to something? What is this? I don't think the movie's really leading to much of anything. It's just basically about the kills and dancing. And if you'll notice, if there's one thing that just really tells you this is a Netflix teen movie that is made to only hold the audience's attention for so long, there's going to be so much dance filler in it. Like, just play the music they know and have characters dance, and you're doing the whole, holding keys in front of a toddler thing, and that's what the movie's doing. And it does, for as gory as it is, the kills are weirdly uninspired. Like, like, it is gruesome, and props to it for that, I guess, but it's like, if you're going to make the gore the star because you literally have nothing else going for you, you'd want to be a little creative with how it happens, wouldn't you? We just talked about this with Final Destination, literally. Like, it's almost cruel to release this so close to a Final Destination movie, which is a franchise that's entire goal is to do something creative and actually put thought into how they kill the characters. And this is just, I mean, like I said, in defense of the movie, in that regard, if you look at a movie like Prom Night or something like that, it's not about creative kills. Like, there's a lot of off-screen stuff, or the kills happen just really quickly, and it's usually just like a stabbing or a decapitation or something. And there's not a lot of an elaborate nature to those old slasher movies. So, it could be that's why they would go with uninspired kills, but like I said, though, if you're going to make the gore as front and center as it is, and essentially make the gore the one thing that you have that might almost be working, then that kind of contradicts the idea of doing the uninspired kills intentionally. So that's just a whole, I don't even know what the fuck was going on here creatively, so there's that. And it's also one of those movies that has a false ending, so you feel like because it feels like the movie itself takes forever anyway, because of just how, frankly, not good it is, and how the repetitive nature that it falls into. So it's like, by the time we get to the false ending, it feels like an ending. So when we have our second ending, which would typically be welcome, and they even leave it open. Like, there's an element that's introduced in, like, the middle act here that lets you know this is a false ending. Like, if you're paying attention, the ending we see is not the ending. So there's a whole other act left where we have to address this other thing. But even then, it's like, you know what? I would have preferred if you just ended. Like, I give so little of a fuck about that other thing. It's like, if you had just ended there, I would have seen it as mercy. But, no, there's like 20 minutes left after it feels like it ended. So, there's that. And there's this mid-credits thing that sort of ties back to the franchise itself. Because I was kind of wondering, but not really, like, so does this tie into the trilogy, or is it its own thing? Of course it ties in, because everything's a goddamn franchise. Nothing can be standalone. That will be too open and shut. We can't milk it enough. So, yeah, there's that. So, basically, it's a waste of time to everybody. Like, everybody that's involved in this should be a little embarrassed, I think. I can't think of anybody that comes out relatively unscathed. It's just a disaster. And I didn't really have high hopes anyway because of the Fear Street, brand at this point. Through Netflix is something that just does not have my interest. As a massive horror fan, as somebody that lives for horror, I just can't with this franchise. So, if you're taken to it and this did something for you, then that's fine. If you have fun with it, whatever. But I can't find. This doesn't happen often anymore either. I've gotten much more forgiving in the past few years, but I can't find one single thing I like about it, which is rare these days, so that sucks. So let's continue with this sort of throwback slasher thing and go into Clown on a Cornfield, which is by Eli Craig, who I've had mixed feelings about in the past. He's done some movies that I like Tucker and Dale. He's done some movies I hate, like Little Evil, and maybe one or two other things that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But now we are at Clown on a Cornfield, and we do have, obviously we're at this place where we're doing the modern slasher that's going to be, tongue-in-cheek and aware and playing on tropes and doing all that stuff, which has obviously led to a lot of Scream comparisons when this movie came out. We'll get into the Scream comparisons a little later, because I really don't think there's that many. I think people just see a modern slasher movie with a killer in a mask and they say, oh, it's Scream. Even though that's been the slasher setup for decades. But it's Scream, I guess. The reason that's confusing to me is because there is a movie this is extremely comparable to that is not Scream. I saw a lot of Thanksgiving in this, the Eli Roth movie from a couple of years ago. And I think this, I feel like this, not in the sense that it feels like it's taking from Thanksgiving, but, this would make a really good double feature with Thanksgiving, is what I feel. And there's a lot about this movie that I like just in vibe alone. And as somebody that is a fan of those slasher movies, that shitty movies like the latest Fear Street movie are trying to bring back, or trying to kind of get the same feel of, where it feels very old-fashioned, it feels very seasonal, which I just really love that feeling. It feels like you feel fall, like autumn through this movie, which is really fun. And anytime they throw in a cliche, it's like when you set up a slasher movie like this that feels very throwback, this is a point in time where you sort of cliches actually feel welcome. It's a very rare space, but when you have the character that's new in town with the tragic backstory that has the strained relationship with her other parent because one is dead, that character is always going to be the center of it. You've got the characters that play pranks, and there's fake out scares. You have the warning from the crazy old guy, the crazy Ralph of the town. And it's every time these pop into a slasher movie, it's it feels like home. Especially when it's really setting up its world really well, and it feels like an actual movie. Because we have a lot of these, and you can see every moment where they're trying to do that feel. But with movies like this, when the feel of the world is there right away, it's every time you see these cliches come in, it's yes, this is what we're here for. These are the slasher movies that we loved in the 80s. And so that, and to take those elements also and drive them in a different way, like the fact that you always have the character that's going to be playing the pranks or whatever. So the setup here with that is that we have these kids in town where their whole thing is making viral videos out of the town mascot, who is the clown. And so, naturally, when it's set up that that's what they do, and, they put these videos online, and it's, a whole town thing that everybody knows about, it, perfectly sets up, cry wolf moments later, where it puts those characters in that position of, when an adult says, oh, you're just doing another one of those prank videos, it feels pretty believable that that would be the reaction, and then it becomes a cause for the characters to be stranded without help. So that's a clever way to sort of take that particular trope and make it here and present as a trope, which is great, and then also work as this other thing that's actually driving what happens later. So that's really welcome. And the idea of playing up the whole who's trustworthy and who isn't thing throughout the town, and like how everybody feels guilty, but everybody also feels like they could just be a red herring. And you have to kind of play that game of who's who and what you think is what until we get to an ultimate reveal. All the stuff we love about, you know, slasher movies is here. And then there's a turning point. And it's probably roughly an hour in, maybe, when we reach this turning point. And what sucks about it is that I love the moment. I love the initial moment where it reaches this point where a scene takes a turn, and when the scene takes this turn, you have this thought as an audience member of, whoa, what the fuck is happening? Because it really sets it up like it's one thing, like it's this traditional slasher movie, and then it seems like there's something else entirely happening. And at first, it's like a really fun feeling, and you have this feeling of, whoa, where is this going, and what is this? But then the trouble with that is once that initial feeling wears off, the, whoa, I didn't see this coming, oh, it's a whole different thing, right after that feeling wears off, it's pretty abundantly clear what's going on, and the mystery element kind of goes out the window, and you're just sort of waiting for the reveal to happen, because you pretty much can figure it out pretty early, long before it's actually revealed. And so, another thing that I just really didn't care for as we went into this third part is talking about the Scream comparisons. How I was saying, not every modern slasher movie feel is just Scream. So I was like, so what's with these Scream comparisons? Are they just lazy? But then it's like, okay, we reach a point in the third part where it doesn't feel like Wes Craven's Scream movies. It feels like the Radio Silence Scream movies. Like, and not just the Scream movies. It feels like a Radio Silence movie in the third part. And and that might sound like a good thing, but first of all, let it be known, if you're familiar with the channel, you probably know that I don't care for Ready or Not. And the reason I don't care for Ready or Not is the reason I don't care for, like, moments of the third acts of their Scream movies, or moments of the third act of Abigail, where it essentially turns into the characters riff-traxing their way through the climax. And it's just so... And I get the whole self-awareness thing and all that and the tongue-in-cheek nature of it, but anytime Radio Silence does that at the end of their movies, I just think it's the fucking worst. It's so cringy and obvious, and it feels like fan fiction. It definitely feels like fan fiction writers, like Reddit comments suddenly started writing the movie, and it happens every time. And like I said, this falls into that so much. I'm already saying this now, I will forget that this is not a Radio Silence movie. I will forget that Eli Craig exists, and based on, like, the characters and the way they act and the things they say in this third act, I will keep forgetting that Radio Silence did not make this movie. And it's the worst elements of Radio Silence that are coming through, making me think that. So... and then when it gets to, like, the conclusion itself and what the reveal is, it's like, I get it, and I get how it's topical, and it's definitely topical, but it's also just so unsatisfying in how obvious it was before it was revealed. Like, when we reached that moment where it was like, for a second you thought, oh my god, I don't know where this is going. And then after a second thought, it's like, oh wait, I know exactly what's going on. Now I'm just waiting for that. And then it gets very exposition heavy, and the climax by itself is fine. But then when you realize there is an open element, like, I thought I had missed something. I thought something had happened, like, so quickly that I didn't even register it. Because when it was ending, it was like, wait, this is actually... Like, I kept waiting for, like, that other shoe to drop ending. Or that, you know, maybe this is the false ending and then we got the other ending. But the more it went on, the more I was like, oh no, this is really ending. There's something missing. And what it appears to be is the most unceremonious sequel baiting I've maybe seen in quite some time. Like, it's so... Like, I'm not even sure how many people are going to register it as sequel baiting. But apparently that's what it is. Because this is based on a book, and apparently this is going to be a trilogy of books, or is a trilogy of books, I'm not sure. So they might continue with that, and I guess that's what they're setting up here. But, yeah, it's not a good feeling to come away from a movie thinking you've missed something. And I mean, I don't want to, like, you know, spell everything out or anything, but like I said, it's the climax. In the climax, you're allowed to be a little ceremonious about what you're doing. But, like I said, I'm like, things weren't even registering. Like, there's being unceremonious, and there's also being non-existent. So it's like, you want to leave feeling something. It's like, it really, really brought it down how I felt coming out of this. To where it was like, oh man, I'm so into this, I'm so into this. I would have never thought, watching those first 2/3, that I would come out feeling like, I feel like I watched an incomplete movie or something. And that's another thing too, where that's also different from sequel baiting. Because with sequel baiting, it gives you that vibe of, oh, well, we're gonna do this now, or oh, so we're gonna see how this plays out. That's totally different than feeling like you've watched a movie that is missing an entire element, almost like it got cut. And that's what your sequel bait is. So that was just, like, shockingly unsatisfying in, like, the last few minutes there. So that really brought it down, but I'm still a really big fan of what was going on for the most part. And maybe if they get to make those sequels, then this will seem more... This one will have a more complete feeling than it does now, and it'll be like, oh, I see why they would set it up that way, so they could do this way or whatever. I guess that remains to be seen, but as it is now, it feels like there's missing pieces, and that's a really unsatisfying thing to leave with. So there's that. Let's go into Hell of a Summer, where we're going to continue this throwback slasher thing. So we had one that didn't work at all with Fear Street, and then we have one that works in a lot of ways with Clown of Cornfield. Here, we're kind of right in the middle. This is another one that I would say, for the most part, is unsuccessful at what it's doing, but there's things here, because we've got our co-writers and directors, who are Finn Wolfhard and Billy Brick, and I'm not extremely familiar with Billy Brick, but obviously Finn Wolfhard has this sort of... He's in his element with horror, because Stranger Things had a lot of horror elements, and it, obviously. So it would make sense, if he's going to make his directorial debut, that it would be in this, you know, horror area. But the thing about it also is... And it does feel like this very 80s horror set. It's very much, you know, like, it might as well be a Friday the 13th specifically remake, in its own way at the start, as far as concept goes. So, because like I was just saying, like, you know, not every mass slasher movie is Scream, but this one feels very particularly Friday the 13th, in regards to the camp setting and the way the kills are set up and all that. And then it goes into, like, what it's doing with itself. But the thing about it is, one thing I've always praised the Friday the 13th movies for is, even though they're known for being these mindless, you know, slasher movies where characters are introduced and then they die and that's the end, there's a climax where they fight Jason doesn't die, and they move on. But what those movies don't get much credit for is that a lot of, like, the first half of those movies are dedicated to the characters and how they interact and what their personalities are. And so this one, you know, delves into that. But the thing about it is, when you look at the characters in this movie versus the horror element, it feels more like the reason I brought up right away that Finn Wolfhard is kind of in his element here, with horror. He was also in that Turn of the Screw adaptation that nobody liked, but it feels like they were going for almost a Linklater vibe, where it's just people hanging out at a camp and doing that whole thing. And it almost feels like that's the movie they would have preferred to make, or almost like the movie they would have set out to make, and then it's like, oh, by the way, there's this horror element. Because the horror element feels so, like, sleepwalking. And when they actually get to... Because obviously, we were talking, again, in Fear Street about how you do kills. Like, whether it's going to be the early slasher movies where you didn't really see that much gore, and a lot of kills were, like, mostly off-screen, or there wasn't a lot of blood to them. Like, you know, the original Halloween, or the original Friday the 13th. Like, I mean, Friday the 13th did have, like, the arrow through the neck and the axe to the face, which are pretty graphic. But by what you're expecting when you see later parts of the franchise, it's pretty toned down. So, like, it can totally be a slasher movie choice to not go all in on kills. Like, to have kills just kind of be this thing that happens while the characters are doing whatever. So, like how much of the original Friday the 13th is devoted to them doing the strip Monopoly thing? A surprising amount. So, and then it's just like, oh, by the way, this character dies off-screen, or whatever. There's a couple of off-screen deaths of major characters in the original Friday the 13th, so... So having, like, lame kills can go one way or the other. And like I said, the reason it doesn't work for Fear Street is because gore seemed to be what they were trying to make kind of front and center. But it's just, the gore was up there, but the, you know, kill quality was not. It was just very uninspired. So here, it almost feels like it's barely... It feels like it's barely present. Because, like, a lot of the time is spent on the Fred Hechinger character, particularly, who's kind of the... We see the people who run the camp killed in the opening scene, and then he, in his naive wisdom, thinks that he's being set up to sort of take over leadership. And he's this very dorkily enthusiastic character. Like even when he's alone, he's that way. And so... And his name is Jason, which I'm assuming is not an accident. And so, when we follow him, and we see him set up as a character, and his interactions with these other... And the way the other characters are, like, antagonistic towards him because of his enthusiasm. And it's like, it makes this sort of sympathetic character out of a character that, yeah, if you were them, you'd probably find him annoying, too, in real life. But as a character, and seeing him from a particular perspective... There is something sympathetic about this, and so we set up these character dynamics, and then just the kills just kind of start happening, and there's this sort of... It's not really a who is it sort of thing, because they all kind of gang up on him and assume it's him, and that's what a lot of the movie is. So, when you have these moments of it being like this slasher throwback, you would have moments that are like, oh, are they going to do something that subverts expectations, or does that sort of thing, because that's what, you know, modern slashers typically do these days. Or is it going to be this thing which it seems more like, which is, it's less about setting up the slasher stuff and then subverting it, more than just, it's like it's just trying to recapture something, like time traveling back to, this is a movie that would have come out in the early 80s or something like that. Rather than trying to be too subversive or say, oh, you think this is how this works, but we're going to do this thing now. It does feel like it's taking the more, like, I think it's also pretty comparable, I think, to the Sleepaway Camp sequels, which are kind of a different thing to Sleepaway Camp, where Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 are much more, like, typical slasher, one person dies after the other thing, and we know who the killer is in those, which is interesting. So I feel like it's more trying to recapture the vibe of that, rather than do anything that's, like, new. And that's something that I can get behind as a concept, but here it does feel like everything is like there's definitely a missing element. Like it's almost too bare bones, like it's too paper thin, even for a throwback slasher somehow. And I don't know if that comes from the fact that it feels so like I said, it almost feels like the horror element was forced on them in the writing stage, and they would have rather written some Linklater movie or something. Or it's almost like, you know, Wolfhard got it in his head or something of like, well, people know me for horror, so I'm stuck here. So I'm stuck in this genre. But I don't know, there's some magic element here that feels like it's missing. And something that would have elevated it to, like I said, Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 are nothing more than characters at a camp being killed. And I don't know, I like those more than I like the original Sleepaway Camp, to be totally honest with you. Because there's like this sort of fun element to it that's all that it is. And it's like, this one feels like it's on the verge of trying to do something that's a little more elevated, but then it never really does. And then, like, the more it just kind of is what it is, the more it feels like it's just stuck in place, rather than this feeling of, like, fun. And there's also moments where it's like, because some kills are seen and some are not, that there's an obvious nature to those, and that seeing a death means one thing and not seeing a death means another thing. That whole thing becomes pretty obvious, and yeah, and the reveal and the motive and stuff like that is just very, even by this, like, there's not really high expectations in general if you're watching a regular slasher movie and there's a motive reveal. Like, there's, like, maybe 2 or 3 motives that you can have in a slasher movie, and it's going to be some variation of those. But here, it's just very... We've seen this motive before, and it just feels like it's... I can't say it comes from out of nowhere, but it feels very... Oh, that's it. Which, like I said, is something that you typically don't feel because expectations aren't high for motives in slasher movies, but... I don't know, it just really, just the whole thing, it just feels like there's some sort of missing element. And like I said, I think it comes back to the fact that it almost feels like it barely wants to be the horror part. So it's like you have the killer in the devil mask, and there's moments where like there's one particular moment when the killer just like unceremoniously walks into the room with like no music or anything, and it's like jarring in this really interesting way. And it's like moments like that give you the idea of, okay, there's something here, but they're so fleeting. And it just feels like there's not a lot in the horror element here. So, I don't know, it feels like this isn't the movie they wanted to make, if that makes any sense. I don't know. I'm really trying to to piece together what exactly it is I feel I needed from this that I wasn't getting, but it's, like I said, I get the ideas that are here, but it just feels like there's a distance, not just from us, the audience, to the movie itself, but like I said, it doesn't feel like, and you would think, you know, them being in their element and them being this team, there'd be like this passion and excitement of making like their first movie, and it certainly does feel like somebody's first movie, but not the kind where it's like you can feel the passion and the excitement. It almost feels like Finn Wolfhard reached a level of fame where he was like, I think this is the part where I make movies now, I think, and this is the uncertain piece that came out. So, I won't doubt that he's probably got a passionate filmmaker in him. And like I said, so you can take it one way or the other in regards to it being somebody's first movie, where it's like, oh, I can really see where it was like, this was almost like an experiment more than anything else. Like I said, you got those other first-time movies where you can see, like, everything in this filmmaker's life was leading to this moment, making this first movie, and that, and how that plays out. But, and oftentimes it'll be a case where they put everything they had into that, and everything they make afterwards is lesser, because they put so much into their first. But this one almost feels like it was like thrust on them, or they made it out of boredom or something, and it just exists. So Yeah. So let's end on Rosario, which is a movie I knew nothing about going in. I knew that David Dastmalchian was in it, and that's what kind of drew me to it. And that was all I knew. I'd seen the poster with the hands on the head. And so this is a movie that feels very small, but has a lot of interesting directions to go in, and utilizes its small sets pretty well. This is also a directorial debut. And the atmosphere is definitely here, and the production design, stuff like that's definitely here. And what's interesting about it being in this sort of one space is the fact that in concept, where we have our lead character and we have her grandmother who has just died, her grandmother who was into all kinds of like ritualistic shit, it turns out, and is gradually revealed as it goes. And so she comes to retrieve the body and then gets snowed in. So the concept is basically her being stuck in this small apartment with her grandmother's corpse, and then the supernatural and the ritualistic stuff starts to take over. That's the concept. And the fact that she's stuck with no power and no heat or anything during this sets up this claustrophobic feel and this very sort of it definitely feels like there's like a sort of maze in regards to the way this is designed, like the apartment building itself, but particularly these places where we have like the lower level room and then we have like neighbors here and there. So it starts off great with this concept and making something feel like weirdly, like supernaturally bigger than it is. Like Mary Poppins' bag is what this apartment is, where it just seems to go deeper and deeper, and the deeper you go, the more fucked up shit you're gonna find, and the more in danger you are. I feel like that description makes this movie sound like a lot more than what it ultimately is at the end of the day. Because there's a lot of promise with everything going on here, but once it kicks into gear, it's basically all stuff we've seen before, with one element thrown in where it's like how a lot of horror these days, especially the stuff like this, like the elevated horror, what they've been calling it, where it's very allegorical and it's definitely about something else underneath its surface. And so there's something to be said here about, like, at first I thought it was going to be like a generational trauma thing, which we've seen time and time again in horror now. But I like the fact that it kind of went the opposite direction of that, and it's more of like a heritage thing. I don't want to say too much, but yeah, the heritage level of how that kind of is the underlying sort of allegorical thing here adds an interesting element to it. But it's one of those things where it basically feels like this was... I had to look up to make sure this wasn't a short film first. Because it definitely feels like one of those horror movies that started off as a short film and then got extended. Because it does feel very sort of like it had ideas and then just got really dragged out. And so those ideas are great, but eventually they don't really amount to like this, what feels like this fully realized bigger picture. It's just sort of ideas as it goes, and then just all kinds of stuff we've already seen a million times over, thrown in between. So, like, and especially there's really interesting moments in this where it kind of feels like it sets itself up in this very serious way, and it takes its subject matter quite seriously, and it takes horror quite seriously. But then there's these really out-of-place moments where it's trying to be tongue-in-cheek with its dialogue. Like I was just talking about the radio silence stuff we were talking about in Clown on a Cornfield, where she's saying, like, she starts commentating, and she'll see, like, you know, the doorway to a scary room, and she says nope, and goes the other way. And it's like, yeah, there was a time where it was cool to be like, hey, look, guys, we're acknowledging the trope. Hey, look, guys, a character's not making a dumb decision. But that's played out enough to this point that it feels old. Not to mention that Jordan Peele by now has literally made a movie called Nope based on that very... that approach to that trope. And it's... like, there's... even back before Peele did anything, in 2019, there's a moment in Haunt where the lead character sees like a tunnel and just says nope. So that doesn't have the freshness that it once did, especially when it's the exact dialogue. And she has moments where she says like fuck this place and tries to leave. But everything just ends up in her coming back anyway. Like, as soon as she does the nope thing, like, the actual payoff to the scene is that she immediately turns around and comes back before there's even a cut. Like, she leaves, and the camera lingers there and waits for her to come back. So it's like it's trying to do the thing, but also do the trope that thing is supposedly making null and void, and it just doesn't... Like, they're trying to do both, but they're contradicting things, and it's ludicrous. So, and a lot of just her talking out loud, like, something dramatic will happen, and then she'll say, oh, now where was I in this book, or something like that. And that just feels really out of place, and like I said, it's trying so hard to do the, oh, this is a character that's relatable, this is a character that you don't have to yell at the screen to do, or whatever, because she's doing it herself, essentially. And that's just not working in the way I think was intended. The lead actress is good, but the dialogue is not working in that way. Like I said, really my only interest in this was David Dastmalchian, who is one of the neighbors who's desperately trying to get his air fryer back that may or may not exist. And he's a welcome presence, but it's almost like it's one of those things where you can imagine they probably had to get an actor that's recognizable in order to get a little more funding for this. And so he just kind of took, like, this side character role. Like, there's not a whole lot to do with it. There's a payoff here and there for the character, and it's entertaining enough, but it's just a side character. So, there's also... I was talking about the production design and the atmosphere they set up, which is very well done. But you also get the sense, I was talking about this being a directorial debut, there is a sort of lack of confidence, it feels like, in how much it's trying to be visually present. Like, it's very much, it's breaking the Soderbergh rule, it's waving the hands in front of the camera and saying, hey guys, look, I'm directing. Like, when she leaves the apartment the first time, it's a sideways shot. And it's not like one of those, like, you know, turning shots. It's just sideways when we get there, and she walks out and it cuts, and then we're back to normal, and it's like, okay. It's like, maybe it's like, oh, she's stepping out into another world between the apartment and outside. I don't know, it just feels it feels like a lack of confidence in directing for the first time, and it's like, guys, I really want you to know that I'm here and I'm trying. And I'm trying to be visually interesting. I don't know what this means, but it's something that looks different. Am I doing it right? Is what it feels like. And that's fine. Like, it's great to be, you know, like, trying to do something interesting. That should be encouraged. Even if it's not working out, again, it's a debut. And there's enough here that makes me think that, like, you know, this is a director that's probably going to do something really good. And this is them sort of finding their footing still. So I don't want to sound like that probably sounded, you know, condescending, but it was, I do think it should be encouraged to try different things and be as creative as possible. And there's also moments, like there are moments that work, like, I'm not even sure if some of these were intentional, but there were some moments where it was like, she'd be talking in the foreground or doing something in the foreground, and there would be moments of, like, did I see something move in the background? I'm actually not sure, and it's something that doesn't lead to, like, some big scare or anything, but just these moments where there's just enough going on to where it has you questioning, like, did I see what I think I saw? Or did I see anything at all? I don't know. That's really interesting and really fun. And there's there's the moment when she leaves the apartment for a little bit, and she has a confrontation with a dog that feels very, like, nightmarish. And it's one of those things where it's like, is this even really happening? It's like, is she even out of the apartment? I don't know. So it's like, and there's stuff like this that they probably could have played with more. But like I said, I'm not even sure how intentional some of these moments were, but there is a feeling there of some kind. But yeah, at the end of the day, it does come back to, it feels just like, you know, an extended short film or something. And like I said, it has a lot of ideas that are interesting. And the more they reveal themselves, like, it does draw you in eventually, but like I said, it does feel more like ideas that didn't quite reach a fully realized place to sort of come to a close at. Also a pretty lame final scene, too. So, yeah, there's still a lot to be desired here, but you can see the makings of somebody that, you know, appreciates horror in a way and has interesting ideas and things to do with horror, but they just don't quite come together in the way they were probably intended. But it's a start for a director's first time. So that's the 5 I think I wanted to talk about today. So we're going to do more of these groups of 5 as we go on, and hopefully get caught up soon, because we've got a really exciting calendar this year in regards to the releases. So until we get to all that stuff, I think that's it.